On my 72nd birthday, which also happened to be the 50th anniversary of my marriage to Alistair, I accidentally dropped our framed wedding photo. While wiping it, the glass cracked and the pictures inside slipped out. Besides our wedding portrait, there was also a woman's ID photo, Delilah's. I quietly picked it up and tucked it into a drawer. I had long since realized that the one my husband truly loved wasn't me. I could only numb myself and pretend not to know. Now the naked truth was right before my eyes. I looked toward Alistair, who was standing alone on the balcony, and said evenly, "Let's get a divorce." Alistair stared at me in disbelief, then angrily shouted that I had lost my mind before storming out. Suddenly a wave of dizziness hit me, the world spun upside down, and the next second it was 1970. When I opened my eyes, I froze. The room was strange yet familiar. I stretched out my hand. My palm was rough with calluses, but free of wrinkles. I had gone back to my youth. I pushed the door open and bumped straight into a young Alistair. He looked startled, opened his mouth, but no words came out. We locked eyes, both choosing not to speak. "Ophelia, why are you just standing there?" I turned and saw a woman running toward me. Her curious gaze flicked between me and Alistair. Seeing her, Alistair's expression grew uneasy. He gave me a deep look, then quickly turned and left. "Rosalind," I murmured, staring at the bold, carefree woman in front of me, unconsciously calling her by name. In my memory, the Rosalind of my past life overlapped perfectly with the one before me. In that other life, Rosalind never caught the wave of the times. When she reached marrying age, she hastily married a man 10 years older in the village. That man often came home drunk and beat her. Her first child was lost to a miscarriage after one of those drunken attacks. From then on, whenever I saw Rosalind, she no longer had the fiery spirit of her youth, only the wear and tear carved by years of hardship. Now Rosalind looked at me with a puzzled expression. "Ophelia, what's wrong with you?" Her words pulled a bitter smile from me. She glanced in the direction where Alistair had disappeared and went on, "How do you know that new educated youth from the city? He's pretty handsome. Those city men are all pale and tender-skinned." A flicker of panic crossed my eyes. Having lived one life already, I wanted no more entanglement with Alistair, so I made up an excuse casually. Hearing it, Rosalind burst out laughing, her voice loud and carefree. "No wonder he ran off so quickly just now. Anyway, I came to tell you something serious. Tomorrow night the brigade is holding a welcome party for the educated youths, and they want us to put together a few performances to celebrate." I was preoccupied, but I nodded casually. Seeing that I had agreed, Rosalind didn't say more. She just told me the time and place for rehearsal and then left. I spent the entire afternoon in my room trying to sort through the chaos in my mind. I recalled the welcome party from my previous life. Rosalind and I had sung a local folk song on stage, and my eyes had instantly found Alistair in the audience, refined and handsome. When the city youths first went into the fields, they didn't know how to work. I had volunteered to teach them step by step just to spend more time near Alistair. He was thin and frail, what people today might call a pretty boy, but in that era a body like his couldn't shoulder farm labor, so I rushed to do the dirtiest, hardest tasks in his place. When his clothes tore, I mended them carefully. I had practically given him my whole heart, and yet all it earned me was decades of cold indifference until I finally learned that his heart had always belonged to Delilah. He had chosen me only because he had no other choice. As the sky darkened, I figured it was nearly time and went to rehearsal. The spot was an abandoned warehouse. As soon as we stepped inside, the dust and smoke had us coughing. After a quick discussion, we decided to practice in the yard outside. The girls lined up in the courtyard, and our clear voices quickly drew the attention of passing villagers. A few educated youths walked by together, stopping when they saw us. Alistair among them. His expression was complicated as he looked at me, his gaze lingering for a moment before he turned away. The educated youth beside Alistair nudged him with a grin. "So, which girl caught your eye? Staring at someone like that isn't polite." Alistair flushed with embarrassment and snapped back, shoving him hard. "I already have someone I love. If you want to stare, stare for yourself." With that he stormed off, leaving the other boy scratching his head, muttering, "If you like someone, you like someone. What's the rush? I saw the whole exchange clearly, but kept my expression calm. It seemed Alistair and I had the same thought. Since there was no love between us, then in this life we would just be strangers. We rehearsed urgently all day, and by the next evening it was time for the performance. The village leaders began with a round of polite speeches, and the educated youths smiled brightly, full of energy. Rosalind squeezed my hand and whispered, "Ophelia, which of these city boys do you think is the best looking?" I rubbed my brow and said casually, "I don't know." Rosalind pouted, disappointed. "Then I think that pale handsome one who talked to you last time looks pretty good. But he's too skinny. If you went to feed the cows, I bet the cows would drag him away." I didn't want to continue talking about Alistair, so I just smiled faintly and said nothing. Soon we girls went up on stage. As our voices rang out, my eyes naturally swept across the crowd. Of course I saw Alistair. He had turned his head, speaking gently to a female, educated youth beside him. She looked exactly like the woman in the photo that had slipped from the broken frame. I recognized her, Delilah, one of the few women among the group of educated youths. She was beautiful, and back then the village boys often sneaked glances at her while she worked in the fields. After our song ended, we left the stage. The girls chatted excitedly about the performance, but I felt an unexplainable weariness. Perhaps my old soul hadn't yet adapted to this young body. I sat down to rest. When suddenly a shadow fell across me, a clear, gentle voice asked, "Are you Ophelia?" I looked up into a refined, handsome face. I knew he was one of the educated youths, but in my past life we'd never really spoken. "It's like this," he said. "Tomorrow is our first day working in the fields, and we need someone to guide us. The villagers told us to find a girl named Ophelia." I froze for 2 seconds before remembering last time, before anyone else was assigned, I had volunteered myself. "No need to call me teacher, just call me Ophelia," I said with a smile. He nodded and introduced himself as Caspian. We began discussing the farm work for tomorrow, and before I realized it, we were talking about all sorts of other things. Having lived one lifetime already, my knowledge and insight were no less than these college students, so I answered Caspian's questions with ease. In the dim light, I caught a flicker of something unusual in his eyes, but I didn't think much of it. Our conversation grew so lively that I lost track of time. By the time we reached the square, most people had already left. "Caspian, what are you chatting about with this girl?" "Everyone else is gone," a sudden voice cut in, interrupting us. I looked up. It was the same boy who had teased Alistair yesterday. His name was Percival. "Don't talk nonsense," Caspian frowned. "We were just going over the work for tomorrow." Percival looked unconvinced, though the seriousness on Caspian's face finally made him drop it. Still, I understood Caspian's concern. Rumors could harm a girl's reputation, so I rose calmly and left with a clear conscience. Percival quickly lost interest and went back to joking around with the others. As I was leaving, I saw Alistair and Delilah sitting together, talking happily. Delilah noticed my gaze and met my eyes. I paused, then gave her a polite smile before walking away. 3 or 4 days later, I led a group of educated youths out to the fields. They were chattering excitedly, clearly full of energy. It was early spring, and though the air still carried a chill, the country breeze in the fields felt refreshing. Of all the seasons, this was the most comfortable time of year. I explained the basic steps to them, and they picked up their tools to start turning the soil, clearing away the weeds and leftover crops from the winter. Most of the educated youths still weren't familiar with the work, and after a whole morning in the fields, their excitement faded quickly. Their arms and legs soon grew sore and weak. Alistair, however, drew on the experience he carried from our previous life. He got the hang of it right away and finished his portion in no time. Percival was panting heavily, unable to catch his breath. "Alistair, it's like you grew up here your whole life. How are you so good at this?" Alistair only smiled faintly and brushed him off, then quickly went over to Delilah. "Delilah, let me help you. How could a girl like you manage such heavy work?" Delilah blushed, smiling shyly, and accepted his offer. By the time the farm work was done, everyone was so exhausted they could barely straighten their backs. We headed to the village office to exchange our work points for grain. For the next several days, I spent my mornings guiding them through farm work. Once they got the hang of it, I returned to my own tasks. I kept track of time in my head. Just a few years from now, the college entrance exams would be reinstated. I was certain Alistair remembered this as well. Lately, whenever he had free time, I often saw him reading and reviewing. I couldn't take the exams, but I knew these next few years would be a golden time for economic growth. I was determined to seize the chance. Since I'd been given a new life, I would never again waste it away trapped in a marriage like before. In the days that followed, Caspian would often seek me out to chat. "Ophelia," he said once, "sometimes I feel like you don't belong to this place. You know no less than a college student." Of course, I had lived decades longer than them, so naturally I understood more, but that wasn't something I could tell him, so I only smiled. "Ophelia, what do you want to do in the future?" Caspian's voice carried a hint of shyness and caution. The way he addressed me was unexpectedly tender. I turned my head to look at him, hesitated for 2 seconds, and asked, "Why are you asking me that?" He was afraid I'd misunderstand, so he hurried to explain, "I didn't mean anything else. It's just you're different from the others. I don't think you'll just marry when the time comes. Maybe you'll go to the city." I hadn't decided yet, but my eyes shone with anticipation. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I do know one thing. In this life, I won't be trapped in a marriage and become a bitter woman again." After that talk, I walked home slowly, but from a distance, I noticed a group of people gathered anxiously at the village office. I didn't pay much attention and kept walking until suddenly someone grabbed my hand. Startled, I turned and saw Alistair's worried face. "Ophelia, do you have any fever medicine?" "Delilah has a fever." He was drenched in sweat with worry. Memories from my last life flashed back. How I had taken on all the dirty and heavy work for his sake, only to have a beam from the pigsty collapse and strike my back. Even as I lay there in agony crying out for help, Alistair had turned away. He didn't want anyone to notice the connection between us, so he simply watched me lying on the ground. It wasn't until a neighbor woman heard my cries that someone finally carried me to the hospital. I had suffered for days and nights in pain, and all Alistair had done was visit me twice with the other educated youths, indifferent and detached. Though many years had passed, that wound had remained a thorn in my heart. Seeing him so frantic now, I finally understood. It wasn't that he was born cold and heartless. He simply didn't care about me, so he had no reason to worry. I forced a bitter smile. "I don't have any." With that, I tried to turn away, but Alistair stepped in front of me. "Ophelia, do you realize what's happening? Stop being so petty. Delilah is really sick." I frowned, confused by his words. "I truly don't have any fever medicine." In this era, medicine was precious. It wasn't something every household had lying around. Anger darkened Alistair's face. "That's not true. In our last life, when I had a fever, you gave me medicine. I remember it clearly." And at that moment, I remembered too. Alistair had always been weak and unfit for farm work. In our past life, Alistair had always been slower at the farm work than the others, often finishing last. It wasn't hard for him to catch a chill, and back then I had been just as anxious as he was now, maybe even more. I had knocked on every door in the village before finally borrowing a few fever pills for him. Now I didn't want to explain all of that, so I said coldly, "I really don't have any. If you've got time to waste arguing with me, you'd be better off asking a few more households." It was the most honest advice I could give, but Alistair refused to let it go. He grabbed my arm roughly. "Ophelia, you're unbelievably selfish. I must have been blind to spend decades with someone like you." He let out a cold laugh, his tone laced with something sharp and bitter. "I almost forgot, you've got someone new now. I never realized you enjoyed chatting so much. We were married for years, and I never once saw you talk with me all night, but Caspian, you've got him spinning around you. He praises you to everyone every single day." I frowned instinctively, snapping back, "Whatever is between us, don't drag other people into it. Caspian and I have only chatted for a few days, nothing more. What he says about me is his business, not mine. My conscience is clear. Besides, what right did Alistair have to lecture me? When we first got together, I had wanted to share everything with him. I'd tell him how poor the harvest was that year, and he'd reply that a farmer's life was hopeless and that it was better to go to the city. I'd tell him Rosalind had married, but her husband treated her badly, and he'd dismiss it saying Rosalind was foolish and lucky anyone had married her at all. Bit by bit, I learned to stay silent. If I didn't speak, I wouldn't be contradicted. If I didn't confide, I wouldn't be dismissed. Remembering all this, I looked at Alistair now, and a trace of quiet disgust flickered in my eyes. I shoved him hard out of my way and continued down the road alone. By then, night had fallen completely. I walked carefully along the dirt path, which had turned muddy from the recent rain. Each step was difficult, and when my foot suddenly sank deep into the muck, I lost my balance and stumbled toward the ditch at the side of the road. A sharp pain shot through me, and I thought I heard the crack of bone. The agony dragged me back to memories of my past life, of when the beam had fallen on me. Alistair rushed up beside me, carelessly stretching out a hand to pull me up. I ignored it, trying to get to my feet on my own. He sneered, his face darker than before. "Are you insane? Move like that, and you'll end up paralyzed for the rest of your life. Don't think I'll take care of you." He shifted uncomfortably and added, "I'm only helping you out of the bond we had as husband and wife in our past life, not because I care. Don't flatter yourself." The stabbing pain in my back left me with no patience. "Then get out of my way," I snapped. "I don't need you standing in front of me." Furious, Alistair yanked his hand back and stormed off. He walked dozens of steps without hearing me call after him, then suddenly whirled around shouting angrily, "Ophelia, you're a fool. Absolutely sick in the head." He strode back toward me only for another figure to reach me first. "Ophelia, are you okay? Did you fall? I'll take you to the hospital." Caspian's face was filled with worry, his concern plain as day. By then I was drenched in cold sweat, my lips trembling as I whispered, "Okay." With my consent, Caspian swept me up into his arms, carrying me like a princess. Alistair's eyes reddened as he blocked Caspian's path. "Men and women shouldn't be this close. What do you think you're doing?" Caspian's eyes turned icy. "What I'm doing is exactly what should be done." With that, he carried me straight to the village leader. That very night, they hitched a cart to an ox and rushed me to the county hospital. After resting for a few days, my injuries were almost healed. During my stay in the hospital, Caspian, being an educated youth himself, couldn't visit me often, but once I returned to the village, he ignored the gossiping eyes of others and brought me 3 meals a day. He even used the work points he had earned to give me grain. I was deeply grateful, and once I recovered, I also began to look after him in small ways. In the following years, I worked during the day to earn work points, and at night, I burned lamp oil to study whatever knowledge I could. Though I hadn't fully decided on my future path, I knew for certain I wanted to go to the city first. After that night, even though Alistair and I lived in the same village, we never crossed paths again. Still, I heard from Rosalind that he and Delilah were officially together. When I first heard it, I froze for a moment, but soon I felt nothing at all. A few years later, carrying my luggage, I left for the city to stay with relatives. At first, I was lost. In my last life, I had followed Alistair to the city, and through his connections, he had placed me in a factory job. I had never found work on my own before. Now I tried applying to several garment factories, but without a diploma and with only a rural household registration, I was rejected again and again. Still, I didn't give up. By day, I went from place to place for interviews, and by night, I took temporary jobs to earn some money. Finally, thanks to the clothing knowledge I had carried over from my past life, I managed to secure a job at a garment factory. Seated beside me was a woman in her 40s whom everyone called Auntie Hong. She had worked at the factory for many years and had wide connections. We got along well, and she often helped me a lot. One day she said, "Ophelia, you're young and pretty. If you went out to sell clothes, I bet many people would buy them." Her words struck a chord in me, and my eyes lit up. What girl doesn't love beauty? In my last life, I had been beaten down until I lost all confidence. Feeling like an ugly duckling wearing pretty clothes had felt ridiculous on me. But in truth, I had always studied clothing styles on my own. I remembered well the fashions that had risen in the department stores back then. With that, I had a goal, and work no longer felt so exhausting. I decided that once I saved enough money, I would ride the wave of the times and start my own business. Within 2 years, I was promoted and given a raise. The domestic economy was thriving and many of my friends had begun their own businesses. I had saved some money too, and when I felt ready, I reached out to Auntie Hong. She listened to my plan with delight and helped me connect with suppliers. To thank her, I promised her a share of the profits. Of course, I couldn't do it alone, so I wrote to Rosalind in the countryside, asking her to come to the city and sell clothes with me. Rosalind was hesitant at first, but her family had already started arranging blind dates for her, which left her frustrated. Taking advantage of a moment when no one noticed, she bought a ticket and boarded the night train to the city. When she saw me, she exclaimed loudly, "Ophelia, you've really changed so much." I laughed, exchanged greetings with her, and then told her about my plan. My ambitions weren't grand, but I wanted to change both our fates through business. Rosalind didn't understand the ins and outs of running a business, but she was straightforward, had a loud voice, and knew how to draw a crowd. Since our starting funds were limited, we set up a small stall by the roadside, laying out the clothes piece by piece. Rosalind had a healthy wheat-colored complexion, tall stature, and a radiant smile. She was the image of a classic northern girl. Wearing the clothes we sold, she shouted out with all her energy. In front of the stall, I wasn't idle either. I explained carefully to each curious customer about the comfort of the fabrics. Most people didn't fully understand, but they still felt that our clothes were good quality. By noon, many had been won over by Rosalind's enthusiasm and bought matching outfits. On our very first day, the earnings were impressive. Excited, I took Rosalind to the department store where we bought a pile of snacks and candies. With that success, both of us were fired up and we started increasing the size of our orders. In just a few years, as our capital grew, Rosalind and I eventually rented a small storefront. In just 2 short years, we had transformed from naive young girls into capable businesswomen who could hold our own in the marketplace. I gradually shifted to working behind the scenes, calculating costs, managing supplies, and keeping the accounts while Rosalind focused on the front. She wasn't good at bookkeeping, but she loved sales and her natural warmth made her irresistible. Anyone who spoke with this lively northern girl couldn't help but be persuaded to buy a few pieces of clothing. One afternoon, I was bent over the ledger studying last month's profits when I suddenly heard Rosalind's excited voice. I immediately stood up to check, worried that trouble had come again. With the size of our business growing, it wasn't unusual for jealous troublemakers to show up. Just a few days earlier, a group of local hooligans had come by intending to smash things, but thankfully I'd seen the situation early and called the police. When I reached Rosalind, she was tugging at a man's sleeve with delight. "Hey, don't you remember me? You once came to our village as an educated youth." "I never really talked to you back then, though." My steps faltered. I hadn't expected a familiar face. His back looked oddly familiar, and before I could turn away, Rosalind called out to me, "Ophelia, look who's here. It's someone we know." The man turned around. It was Alistair. The moment his eyes landed on me, he froze, standing there in stunned silence. Rosalind, however, didn't linger on him long. Her eyes shifted instead to the woman beside him whose belly was heavily swollen. "Delilah, you're so far along already, 7 or 8 months, right? You really need to be careful." Rosalind's loud voice made Delilah flush with embarrassment, and she smiled awkwardly. In that instant, I understood. In this life, Alistair had finally married the woman he loved. Rosalind seemed to sense the awkwardness in the air and quickly changed the subject. "I remember when you all went back to the city to take the college entrance exams. By now you must have great jobs, right?" Alistair seemed to come back to his senses and said, "I passed the exam." Delilah didn't. She was pregnant at the time and couldn't focus on studying. Rosalind froze. So many years had passed since those exams, and without meaning to, her eyes dropped to Delilah's belly. Delilah lowered her voice so much it was barely audible. That child didn't survive. Rosalind realized at once she had spoken carelessly and quickly hugged Delilah in comfort. I quietly studied Delilah. Her cautious, diminished demeanor mirrored what I had been like in my last life, constantly belittled and denied until I lived in fear and self-doubt. Alistair was like a vampire. Anyone who loved him, anyone who cared for him would eventually be drained of all value. Alistair's expression grew darker. He abruptly yanked Delilah away, dragging her out of the store. Their backs almost like fugitives fleeing the scene. That encounter felt like nothing more than an interlude, leaving no real trace on the life Rosalind and I had built. By then our clothing shop had taken solid shape. We hired several clerks to serve customers while I started planning something new. I wanted to learn a foreign language. Many overseas clothing styles hadn't yet reached China, and if I could study abroad for a few years, then return, my store would surely rise to a new level. I had never formally studied a foreign language, only glanced at Alistair's review materials in my last life when he was preparing. This time I went to the bookstore, bought a stack of books and asked Rosalind to take care of the store while I devoted myself to learning. Once I judged the timing right, I packed my luggage and left for another country for a year abroad. I wandered through every street and alley, studying each piece of clothing in the malls carefully. At night I would sketch designs from memory, recreating what I had seen. I even made surveys, printed them and handed them out to passers-by, collecting data on which styles people preferred and which fashions appealed to different age groups. Besides that, I often sat quietly in a corner of the plaza with my sketch pad, watching people. Whenever I encountered a beautiful scene or a stylish outfit, I would capture it on paper. These sketches had become my record of inspiration. That day I was focused on a young girl in a white dress squatting on the ground surrounded by pigeons, a picture of peace and quiet. I lifted my pencil and gently outlined her figure on the paper. Suddenly a voice came from behind me. "Ophelia." The tone carried a hint of uncertainty. I turned, and the moment I saw the man's face, he also saw mine. His expression lit up with surprise. "Caspian," I said his name with hesitation. It had been so long that I wasn't entirely sure, but a gleam flashed in his eyes as he sat down beside me. "I never imagined I'd run into you here. After the exams, I went back to Goa village looking for you, but the villager said you had left for the city. How have you been? Are you married?" I raised my brows and smiled. "I did go to the city. I opened a clothing store. I came here to study fashionable styles before going back." Caspian nodded quickly. Though when I didn't answer his last question, his face showed a trace of disappointment. My eyes glimmered with mischief, and I added, "I've been busy with work. Who has time for marriage?" Instantly his expression brightened, a smile spreading across his lips. He insisted on taking me to dinner. At the restaurant, I wrote down the address of my shop on a slip of paper and handed it to him. "This is my clothing store. You can come find me if you have time, and if you want to buy clothes, I'll give you a discount." He smiled as he took it, folded it neatly, and slipped it into his pocket. We chatted for a while, and just before we parted, he handed me his brooch. He seemed to have words on the tip of his tongue, but held them back, only smiling instead. I didn't ask, and we both tacitly let it be. Something tender and ambiguous began to grow between us, but our main focus was still on our careers. He didn't have the courage to break through that barrier, and I wasn't yet ready to accept a relationship. After a year abroad, I returned home with stacks of sketches. In just 1 year, the changes in China were immense. The street where our shop stood was now lined with many new stores, and business wasn't as good as before. Competition among clothing shops had become fierce. Rosalind was overjoyed to see me back, bustling to organize a welcome party for me and chattering nonstop about everything that had happened over the past 2 years. "Ophelia, you have no idea how much has changed. Alistair got divorced. Do you remember him? One of those educated youths who came to our team years ago." I nodded. "I remember." Rosalind, encouraged by my response, went on with even greater excitement. "You wouldn't believe it. Back when he was chasing Delilah, he poured his heart out to her, practically worshipped her. But after they married, he started looking down on her, blaming her for failing the college entrance exams and for being useless. He'd scold her at home all the time, calling her a burden. I was stunned, though not surprised. That was simply who Alistair was. His nature never changed." Rosalind shook her head with sympathy. "Delilah was pitiful. She had been pregnant, and even then he treated her like that. In the end, she lost the baby. She fell apart afterward, her mind no longer well. Her parents came and took her back home. They're intellectuals living in the city, and when they saw how their daughter had been treated, there was no way they'd let it go. They pulled some strings and had Alistair's job taken away. Now he can only work in a factory, and he was a college student once. I sighed softly. It's just a shame Delilah gave her heart to the wrong person. My tone carried a grief I couldn't hide, a grief not only for Delilah in this life, but also for myself in the last. Rosalind fell silent for a moment, then seemed to remember something. Oh, Ophelia, are you and Alistair close? Ever since he lost his job, he's been coming around our store, asking about you. A wave of disgust rose in me. No, we're not close. My voice was cold, sharper than I intended. Rosalind immediately sensed something was off. I only nodded, feeling a little puzzled, but I didn't let my thoughts linger on Alistair. The very next day after returning home, I contacted my suppliers and gave them my sketches along with detailed requirements for the styles I wanted produced. I also reached out to Auntie Hong, the woman I had once worked with at the factory. She had been dismissed because of her age, and when I learned the news, I immediately brought her in to help manage the factory work. With her years of experience, I trusted completely that she wouldn't let me down. Ophelia, these designs aren't available anywhere in the country yet. I'm certain they'll be a huge hit, Auntie Hong said with a smile as she looked over my sketches. My own eyes shone with confidence for the future. I started contacting investors, hoping to raise funds to expand and strengthen the business. I attended several banquets, but most of the businessmen weren't interested in putting much effort into this. Compared to light industry, heavy industry made money faster and more steadily. That all changed once my new clothing line hit the shelves. Almost instantly, it sparked a craze in the city. Orders flooded in, selling out completely. That night, Rosalind, Auntie Hong, and I gathered in the shop to tally the numbers. Rosalind couldn't make sense of the accounts, but when she saw the figures I had written down, her eyes lit up. Ophelia, we're gonna be rich. Auntie Hong laughed too, adding, now we can really expand. I nodded, unable to hide the joy on my face. Tomorrow, I'll go back to those business partners I spoke with before. This time, I'm sure we'll land the investment. And just as I expected, the next day we secured it. I immediately rented a large storefront in the city's department building, renovated it completely, and set up my own partnered factory. That way I could guarantee that the products matched the designs without fail. Rosalind suggested we hire several tall, beautiful young women to model the clothes for customers as they entered, and sales skyrocketed. One afternoon while I was busy at the shop, I noticed a familiar figure lingering outside. I looked closer. It was Alistair. He looked much older, worn down by life, even more aged than in my last life. He stood quietly outside the store for a while before walking away. It was his own doing. He had never cherished what he once had, and in the end he was left with nothing. After that day, I never saw him again. My days were peaceful, and I almost forgot the events of my past life. Then one afternoon, the bell above the shop door rang. From the front counter, Rosalind called out in her loud voice, Ophelia, someone's here to see you. I answered and walked quickly toward the front. Sunlight streamed into the shop, and when I looked up, I saw Caspian standing there, smiling at me. His eyes were full of tenderness and affection as he said softly, Ophelia, it's been a long time. Caspian's voice stirred something deep inside me. After all the years of struggling, rebuilding, and carrying the weight of both my past life and this one, I suddenly felt a quiet calm settle over me. I smiled back at him, not with the naive eagerness of the girl I once was, but with the confidence of a woman who had built her own life with her own hands. Rosalind came bustling over, her laughter echoing through the shop, and Auntie Hong looked on with her usual warmth. For the first time in decades, I realized I was surrounded not by betrayal or disappointment, but by people who truly cared for me, people who had chosen to stand by me without asking for anything in return. Alistair never came back, and I no longer wondered about him. Delilah's story had already shown me that his love was nothing but a fleeting illusion. I didn't hate him anymore. I simply let him fade into the background of my memory like a shadow on a wall. My shop grew. My dreams reached further, and with each day I learned how to love myself more. The girl who once gave everything to a man who never cherished her was gone. In her place stood a woman who finally understood that happiness was something she could create for herself. As I looked at Caspian, at Rosalind, at the bright future stretching out before me, I knew this life was mine to live freely. No more regrets, no more wasted years. I had been given a second chance, and this time I would not let it slip away.